So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paolo Frankel. I'm the head of the Renewable Energy Division at the International Energy Agency, and I have the privilege to give you a short introductory talk on India's renewable and energy ambition, of course, seen from our perspective, that I hope will trigger then intense discussions in the two panel discussions that will follow. Now, to start with, I would like to give you an idea of how ambitious the targets of the India plan are, in particular in terms of solar PV, comparing the following numbers. These are the installed capacities that India installed in the whole period 2012-2016, so over 4 years. And these are the annual additions that are in the plan of the government of India in order to have 160 gigawatt of cumulative installed power of wind and solar in 2022, and 175 if you include also bioenergy and small hydro. So this is very ambitious, because it means that from now on, India needs to install in 1 year much more solar than it used to install in 4 years before. I'm not saying it's unfeasible. I'm just saying it is very ambitious. Now, one positive driver of this is not just policy, but of course it's one important thing, which is reducing costs. The decrease of costs everywhere, but also in India, has been dramatic here, and in particular thanks to the auctions systems that proved very effective in reducing the generation cost over time. Having said so, I would like to show you this graph, which shows India compared to other auctions, and I'm sure you're also aware of the latest one, very cheap. Sorry, the graphic is pretty bad. In the UAE here, in Dubai, in Chile, but also look at the last auction in Denmark at $60 per megawatt hour, because this compares with some of the last auctions in India as well. So the point is that the price differences here, of course, depend on system prices, of course on resources, but also on cost of financing. And I'm sure that you will discuss this extensively, certainly during the second panel session later today. Now, what is sure is that India is shifting its mix towards renewables. Now, this does not mean that the country stops doing coal. On the contrary, it will increase coal. Now, what I show, the question is, how much? And of course, how much renewables? Roughly speaking, electricity, from our perspective, electricity demand is growing in India at a rhythm of around 5% per year of cumulative growth rate, annual growth rate. This scenario that I'm showing here, this is the World Energy Outlook 2016 new policy scenario. This is in line with the pledges that India submitted at COP21, which is basically 40% of capacity, including nuclear, by 2030. India now wants to be more ambitious than that. So even in this scenario, you can see how much renewables grow, although they arrive at a share which is 1/3 by 2040 and 43% of generation with hydropower. It could go beyond that if the new, more ambitious intentions and targets are implemented. And indeed, the energy targets that we're speaking about, the 160 gigawatt, are actually in line with ambitious climate targets. And let me show this very shortly. This is the situation in 2016 in terms of installed capacity of bioenergy, solar PV, and wind. These are the targets. So very ambitious, in particular of solar. This is the benchmark with our NPS scenario. But to be in a truly 2 degrees trajectory, as we model in our 450 scenario, you would need much more, and then you would definitely conclude that the 2022 targets that India has set are compatible with a 2 degrees trajectory from our perspective in 2040. We are speaking of an enormous acceleration in the sector, and how to do it is precisely what you are going to discuss, we all are going to discuss here today. Now, one remark, and it's about remuneration schemes. The question is always, is, for instance, utility-scale solar PV competitive in India today? We did a comparison with long-run marginal cost of the fossil fuel generation, which would set the price in a wholesale market. And you would come to the conclusion that depending on the weighted average of cost of capital, utility PV of scale solar PV in India is competitive before 2020, or even now, if you have a WACC of 5%. Of course, the weighted cost of capital that India may, the real one that may have, may be higher than that, and this will influence the competitiveness if you have the ambition to remunerate on this. Now, India wants to do much more, and here I just want to warn about one non-obvious effect. In a 450 trajectories, the cost of PV would be lower, that's obvious. But what is a little bit less obvious is that the pure remuneration on from an energy-only wholesale market price would be also lower in the absence of a carbon price. Because in a 2 degrees world, there is less demand for fossil fuels and the prices will be lower. Just have this in mind, that all this is dynamic when we speak about competitiveness. And it opens important question about the market design that the country, this is not just a problem for India, of course, it's a problem everywhere. The market design that the countries want to set up to implement the energy transition towards a clean, secure future energy mix. Second big issue, everywhere, not India, system integration of variable renewables, solar PV and wind. This can be done. We have many parts in the world where we have reached double-digit shares of wind and solar in the mix. But it requires a system transformation towards much more flexible power system. Flexibility here is the key word. It means to have, and it has 3 pillars for a strategy. First, have better system and market operations where the market are in place. Second, invest more in flexible resources, and for us, the flexible resources have 4 dimensions. It's strong grids, it's flexible generation from other sources, both thermal and other renewables like hydro. It is storage. Today it's pumped hydro, but in the future it could be part of batteries. And it is also demand-side response, which sometimes is very effective in order to cope with the variability of wind and solar. The only issue that in many places in the world there is no market for demand-side response. The third aspect is that wind and solar themselves can be applied in a more system-friendly manner if you look at distributed resource integration, if you look at the system services that they can provide, if you look at when and where the electricity is generated and you give locational and time signals of the prices that remunerate that, and certainly last but not least, if you have a coordinated, integrated planning. My message is just when we speak about markets, market forces and competition are very important, but the market in a classical term, the wholesale energy-only market that we use in the Western form, will do not it alone. Now, I want to conclude here to put on the table, from our perspective, a few drivers and a few challenges that I think are determinant to whether India will be successful, I hope so, in this transition. There are many drivers in India. First of all, an excellent resource of renewables. Definitely a growing power demand, which is very different from countries like Europe or Japan or the OECD countries. Robust and supportive policies in environment with ambitious targets. India has, just to be clear, India has a very robust set of policies in place, but it has to look at careful implementation of these policies. And definitely, the auction schemes combined with long-term power purchase agreements are a factor for success. But we see a number of challenges. I just listed 4. Definitely, an accelerated implementation of the federal targets at the state level in a more coordinated way, if we can speak about coordination, but anyway, in a more systemic way. Look carefully and improve the financial state of those who have to buy the power. Because in any kind of these markets, you need to be sure of 2 things. One is that the electricity that you produce from wind and solar can be dispatched, and second, that there is someone who is capable to buy it. Third, faster grid infrastructure expansion, not necessarily everything in centralized manner. The potential in India in particular for decentralized energy solutions is huge and should be addressed from the very beginning. And definitely other issues that are maybe more important in India than other places. I just picked the example of land acquisition for some renewable projects. I would stop it here and drop the ball to you, to the panelists, to discuss these issues, and I'm sure other issues that the panelists will add. So thank you very much for your attention. I think it was exact in time, which for an Italian is always a very good performance. Thank you so much.